And we're back with another episode of Life Changing Challengers. As always, I'm your host, Brad Minus, and I am super excited to be talking to the future. Gaby Villa is in Australia right now, so it's actually one day later in the morning. So we're talking to the future. All right. So Gaby is a dietitian, a sports nutritionalist. Let's just say that she's an expert, and most of her expertise is in food and fuel. So Gaby, how you doing?
Hey, Brad. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the invite.
Oh, no, I'm super honored to have you here. The thing that I didn't mention that I was going to mention was, so Gaby is an avid triathlete, and trail runner, of which, yours truly is, an avid triathlete and runner. So we have a lot in common, and I'm super excited about it. So let's dig in. So Gaby, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? What was the complement to your family? Where did you grow up? And what the environment was like?
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in a city called Saltillo in Mexico. So that is north of Mexico, probably like driving like 3 hours to get to the border, and we're exactly south of Texas, essentially. And I am the oldest of, well, it's a complicated arrangement of family, but I'm the oldest of 6 siblings in total. But back then, when I was a kid, we were 3 in total. So I would say, yeah, like my childhood, I remember it as a happy one. My brother and I are 1.5 years apart, so we spent a lot of time together. Both my parents are entrepreneurs, or they had their own business. So dad had a butcher and mom had a photography studio. So we will spend most of the time with mom because the way the business work was very flexible, and it allowed us to spend most of our days pretty much just playing around the studio. She had a very large room where we will just like, I remember playing teacher and things like that with my brothers. So we will always like be having fun games and things like that. Then my sister came when I was 6 years old, and that was me asking for her because I really wanted a little sister. And yeah, so like essentially it was 3 of us. In terms of how the family was composed, that was pretty much us till I think I turned 13, and that's where my parents decided to split. So now I'm going into older years, because I know you ask about the childhood, but just to explain how I ended up with so many siblings.
Yeah.
Essentially, dad got married again a few years later, and his wife has a kid. He's 20-ish, so he's my stepbrother now, and they got 2 kids together. So I have a half sister who is 6 and a half brother who is 15. I absolutely adore them. They are beautiful kids. Of course, now I don't see them very often because I'm living very far away, but that is a family arrangement. Now I'm happy to bring it back to my childhood
Yeah.
now that.
Well, no, I think it's fantastic that you obviously still have a good relationship with your dad and your mom, so that's fantastic. 'Cause that doesn't happen a lot, right? When people split and of course they change in geography, it doesn't happen. So it's fantastic that the idea that you said that you adore them, meaning that you still have a good relationship. So that's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. I think moving to Australia, probably when I moved to Australia, my little sister was not around yet, but my little brother was. He was 6 years old then. And yeah, 6 or 7. He was 7. Anyway, to me, that was one of the hardest things, leaving him. It was really, really hard. And I was coming just to do a master's degree. It was not necessarily thinking that I was going to stay here for such a long time. So yeah, it was probably one of the hardest things because I know I've always had a good relationship with them.
That's great. So you're 13, you split up. Did you end up living with your mom?
No, we ended up living with dad.
Okay.
Mom's still around. We still like obviously have a really good relationship with mom.
Yeah.
It was just, I guess the situation, it meant that mom felt it was better for us to stay with that. It was like, it's really complicated, and it's about like essentially the house and like that being like financially
Okay.
involved
Yeah.
and things like that. To stay there, stay with the house. And like essentially it's like, I'm here, I love you. And that's how it ended up being, which of course I know. And the more time passes, the more I understand how difficult that was for mom and how it was such a really difficult thing to do, especially when I think of now. I mean, I'm married now, and I was having a chat with my husband recently because we were watching a show and they are splitting up and the ladies are staying at the house. And my husband is like, of course she's going to stay down. I was like, hang on, like, let me understand what you think. Because of course we are not planning on split up or anything like that. But like, it's interesting to think like, what are the assumptions, I guess. So anyway, yeah, it was definitely difficult.
So in the research that I did with you, you had mentioned that in your teenage years that you had some body image issues. You want to go into a little bit about that so we can now we can start digging into the real meat of it?
Yeah, definitely. So I think actually it did start from childhood, let's say. So both mom and dad had issues with their weight when they were younger. So with all their, as I'm sure that it was with intentions, they, especially with my brother and myself, they were very strict about food, let's say. And I remember we strict I want to say in a good way. So like, oh, you can't eat, but it was very conscious about what we were eating. And because for themselves, it continued to be an issue, they continued to try diet after diet. And of course, as the new diet comes in now, the kids are also doing the same thing. So we will have these diets. Thankfully, I think most of the diets were, let's say, balanced, even though it still was a restriction. And now I understand how harmful that was, even though they did have the intention of this being good for us. I remember going to school with a tin of tuna and some crackers, and that was my lunch. When most people will have a sandwich or something a little bit more conventional. That was when I was probably in primary school. Then, of course, the more time passes, and in my teenage years, I'm starting to become even more self-aware, and my body's changing again, and all these things. That's when things started to get a little bit more complicated, let's say, in terms of now I'm a little bit more independent. I can take decisions, I think. And now that I reflect on it, I think that food wasn't necessarily the problem. I'm thinking it was more exercise that I was becoming more and more obsessed with. I remember we went to, because we used to swim. We were part of the state, well, actually the local team, the swimming team. And then we would go also to the gym. And I remember one day, mom took us to the gym and we were meeting this new coach or this new personal trainer, essentially. And he gave us a really light load. It was very easy training session. I came back home crying and crying and crying because it was not hard enough. Like, oh, we barely didn't do anything and it was not hard and I barely sweat. I was like, now that I think of it, I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe I was so annoyed because I didn't essentially, I think to me it was like I didn't exercise enough. Of course, now it's like, well, I didn't burn enough calories or it was like wasted time or whatever. So it's like obviously very troubled relationship with physical activity. To me, physical activity was a means to, yes, making my body look different. And of course, it meant that yes, also the way I was eating was also very controlled and I was very careful about things. But then, of course, the binges will come, and whenever I will find, it was usually cashews or nuts in the pantry that will be my thing because the house is all healthy. So there's actually no cookies, there is no chocolate, there's nothing you can eat like that. So it will be cereal or peanuts or things like that are like the health stuff there. That, of course, is compared to all the other things, was the things that were higher in energy. So yeah, that was pretty much how I was approaching my, I guess, idea of looking after myself.
Okay. So let me ask you a question, because this is what we, obviously this is what's going on in America right now, both with kids and with adults. When you look back at that moment and you looked at yourself in the mirror, whether it was you passed by a mirror when you're going to swim or you were getting dressed in the morning or whatever, what did you see? Was there something that you saw that maybe your parents said that, no, that's not right, that's not what we see, or maybe your brother said, that's not what we see, that's not what I see? Did you see something else? Did you feel like you were bigger, smaller, not big enough, not small enough? How did that work?
I I do know that among the kids at school, I was among the bigger ones, definitely. Now I see photos of myself, I was like, oh my God, what? Like, I look like a normal kid, actually. Compared to all the other kids, yes, I was definitely bigger, but not significantly. I remember there was a classmate and myself that will always be the ones who will be. I really hope people are no longer doing this, but they will always pick the chubby kids as the goalkeepers whenever we will play soccer.
Yeah.
And I was always the goalkeeper and
Uh,
her as well. So, yeah, anyway, of course, there were definitely those insecurities because, yes, like my body. And the thing is that's something that I'm able to recognize now. I am aware that my body is this size. It's definitely never going to be size X or like whatever.
right, right.
And that is okay. So now is understanding that there's a wide range of body types. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's more about like, okay, in this body that I'm in, how am I going to look after my body and make sure that I'm as healthy and as happy as possible?
No, and I get it. And as triathletes, it's like the aesthetics. Obviously, we still all have the ability that we look at it and we're like, I'd like a little bit more to be as more aesthetic. But as triathletes, it's kind of like, okay, what do I put in my body that's going to fuel my next workout? It's going to fuel my next race, going to get me to that next PB. That becomes the priority versus aesthetics. You know what I mean? Like, I know I fueled my workout. Hey, is my abdomen a little more distended that I would like? You know, do I have a little bit going over my Speedo? I don't wear Speedos, by the way, just so you know. I wear jammers. Is it sticking out a little bit more? Well, why is it sticking out a little more? Well, because you had a few more carbs last night. Carbs tend to hold on to water a little bit more. Therefore, it might look a little more distended at that point in time, right?
And the thing is that triathlon makes you very self-aware, especially with the tri suits. And
Right.
I always say, like, seriously, after seeing at the pros in a tri suit, I'd be like, they don't look great either. It's like, okay, now I'm happy. Like, no one looks okay in a tri suit anyway. Because yeah,
Yeah.
like it was very like feeling. Because of course it's a skin suit essentially. Like all of you it's exposed pretty much, and it makes it quite challenging. And I still see and I have a lot of, I guess, compassion for people who feel that way because I'm part of like different triathlon forums, and I see people commenting, it's like, oh my God, this is awful. I feel so like trapped in this thing, and I'm looking at the photo and I can see that actually I don't see anything wrong with it. After being in so many triathlons, there is such a wide spectrum of body types and people that I think is important to essentially open your perspective instead of just looking at this select few that finish and look at all the other rates, that you realize it's like, hang on, there's actually so much diversity here as well.
No, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute. I remember there was an issue of Triathlete magazine and it had all my favorite pros in it and they posed naked, but strategically. And it was very artsy. Like, oh, in Australia, Marinda Carfrae, right? Marinda Carfrae is like in her time. I mean, you're talking about 3-time Ironman Kona world champion, she's married to Tim O'Donnell, right? But I remember that issue, and Marinda was in it. Craig was in it. Craig, one of my favorites at the time, and I'm just losing it right now. But like all Lionel Sanders, I think, was in it at the time, and Sebastian Keneal was in it, and I mean, just like all these like my favorites at the time. And yeah, you're right. None of them looked, like you wouldn't see them in a men's health magazine, because we either get on the skinny side as triathletes, or we have like skinny. We look kind of like skinny fat, if you want to put it. And that's just a normal thing with us. And it's very hard for a triathlete to lose weight if they want to maintain their training.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of triathlon, where did that start for you? Because I know that you were a swimmer.
Yes. So I was a swimmer, and I think I was like 15 years old when my cousin saw that there was a local triathlon. So essentially, because I was a swimmer, I had cousins, including that cousin. She was a swimmer. And then we had uncle and some cousins who were runners. And then, for example, dad was always on, not necessarily cycling, but he used to do a lot of a spin bike and things like that. She thought it would be a great idea to have some family relays. So we organized several ones, and it was quite exciting, actually. I remember feeling very excited to be part of the competition between the family in terms of which team was going to win, because we had a cousin that was a really good cyclist for us because he was always cycling. And so let's see how this goes. Anyways, we went to the triathlon. It was an entire distance triathlon. I think it was like 300 meters.
Fine.
It was 15K bike and like a 3-4K run, something like that. It was not necessarily. So anyway, we went to the triathlon, and the whole experience to me was fascinating. So fascinating. So I decided that I wanted to do it again. I was like, I want to do one of these on my own. And I had to wait a whole year for the next triathlon in the city. So essentially, when the triathlon came, my preparation for it, I was still swimming. I seriously couldn't run much, as in like my fitness for running was not necessarily there. I remember because of part of the swim team, they will take us to do maybe once a week some running sets or something like that. And 2 weeks before the triathlon, that would take me to a space where I could go on the bike. And all the objective was to make sure I wouldn't fall. So whenever I needed to dismount, I wouldn't fall off the bike. That was essentially the preparation for it. But of course, I crossed the finish line of that triathlon, and it felt like I finished an Ironman. It was just an experience that it felt so satisfying. And like, I mean, I'm sure you have experienced that as well, but to me it was like, this is amazing. And even though I was swimming and I was part of competitions, I have never experienced something like that before. So I just fell in love with it. I just decided that I wanted to keep doing that. Of course, because it was still in my city and very local, there were not many options in terms of training and races. So I essentially was pretty much a triathlete, even though I was continuing the similar training structure that I just described and waiting a whole year to do the next one.
Nice.
Yeah, so once I moved to do my dietetics degree, I moved to a city called Monterrey, and that's bigger. There was a cycling team and the university, so I joined that, and that's when things became a little bit more serious. I went to a triathlon in that city, and it turned out that a few of us participating were part of the same university, so we actually decided to start the triathlon club. So I'm one of the founders of the university's triathlon club there. And yeah, so essentially everything else, of course, I mean, I can continue because this is now 20 years of history. But yeah, essentially every single event just became more and more exciting. And of course, the more time it passed, of the preparation was getting a little bit more elaborate for sure.
Right. So you said Monterey, California, or Monterey, Mexico?
Monterrey, Mexico.
Oh, okay. What was the name of the university?
Tecnológico de Monterrey. Monterrey's Institute of Technology and Higher
Got it.
Education, something like that.
Yeah. Oh, well, that is so cool that you started your own triathlon club at the university level. That's fantastic. I ran the Marine Corps Marathon in 1999. I was in the military. I had just finished my master's degree, and there was the Marine Corps Marathon because I was living in DC. I was stationed at the Pentagon, so it's like right there. One of my buddies said, "Hey, do you want to run this?" And I'm like, well, let's do it. Let's train for it. Now, back in 1999, if you were in the running community, but we weren't. We were in the military community. Knew nothing about gels, knew nothing about hydration. Basically, we did 18 and 19 milers with a 20-ounce bottle of water. That was it, water. And yeah, so when I got done with that marathon, I completely drained my glycogen stores, like completely. And if you've ever done that, you realize that you feel like you've got the flu. Like nothing is going to, and it takes 48 hours for you to fill your glycogen stores again. It was the most awful thing ever. So I said at that point, I was like, one and done. 10 years to almost the day, I had gone through the military. I'd separated after the OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, the global war on terrorism, basically. And then I started working and I started becoming a workaholic. So I started this boot camp class to get me back in shape. And a friend of mine in the boot camp class saying, "Hey, we're doing the Chicago Marathon," which is actually where I'm from. I'm actually from Chicago. I wasn't born there, but I was raised there. And he says, "We're doing the Chicago Marathon for this charity because my wife has polycystic kidney disease, and we're going to do that." Now, I'd sworn off marathons. I'd said, forget it. But anyway, lo and behold, I ended up doing it. I gotten hurt. But in the midst of training for it, the same buddy goes to me, "Hey, I'm doing this sprint triathlon. I think it's a great way for you to cross train. Why don't you try it with me?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'm down." Bought a bike and started training. And I did it. It was a sprint. It was a USAT. It was a USAT sanctioned event. And I did it. And I, just like you, came across the line and was like, wow, look what I just did, you know? So yeah, that was my introduction to it. A year later, I'd gotten injured badly, which is then a year later. And then, so I'd done several triathlons in that midst. And then I started coaching. So someone said, "Hey, you're doing really, really well." Yeah. And I started coaching. And I've never been like you. It's about the PB. It's not about the medal. It's not about getting on the podium. I've been on the podium, but very rarely. I'm an average age grouper, top third, top 50%, depending on who's there. It's all about finishing it. And my methodology is, I want you to finish with a smile. That's how I want you to experience it. So you started this triathlon club. You started getting into more races. Were you competing as a triathlon club with other university clubs?
Yes. So we have in Mexico, and I'm assuming everywhere. For example, here in Australia, they are called uni games. So over in Mexico, it was Universiada. And essentially every year it will happen, but it will be for different sports. And because now we had a triathlon club, we were able to participate as well. So it would be pretty much a national thing. That's when you are faced with reality. Because, for example, in my case back then, I was not winning, but I was pretty much every race I would go to, I will be in the podium. And then we go to the national competition, and it was like, I think I finished like second last or something like that. It was just crazy. But of course, it was a really good experience, a reality check in terms of like, hang on, like maybe you're not as good as you think you are. But yeah, it was always lots of fun, because the best part, especially being at that age, was that we will go on the trip and we will meet people from other places, and you stay in this hotel and everybody else is like having excursions and things like that. So it was a good experience for sure. So I went to that twice, I think.
That sounds amazing. So NCAA triathlon is like just barely right now. It's in its infancy. There are a lot of universities that do have triathlon teams, but the actual like competition is not as well, at least that I've seen. It's not as prevalent as it sounds like you were, at least what the environment that you were in. So, but I'm really, really hoping that it takes shape here in the States. So you were at the University Monterey, the Technology University in Monterey, and you were studying, what was that what you were studying?
That was my dietetics degree.
So the dietetics degree. And what led you to that? I mean, I know that we talked about the image thing and the whole bit, but what led you into going into to be a dietitian?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting story, because I'm assuming, because I'm always talking about my body image and issues with food, that someone looking from the outside would think, oh, that's why she become a dietitian. Because often, if you are obsessed with food, you end up there. But in my case, it had absolutely nothing to do. Like, to me, it was extremely different to my experience. So what happened is that when I was in the swimming team, and this was me 13 years old, the coach wasn't what I would think of an ideal coach. I was very frustrated to see that, first, my results as a swimmer were never good, but I could see the talent in some of other swimmers there. And it felt like such wasted talent, because the coach just wouldn't care. Like, I knew they were really, really good. And the coach would be like, oh yeah, whatever. For example, we would have like the 5 a.m. swim set, and he will be laying down. He will just like write the set and then just lay down to have a nap. I was like, what are you doing? And then, of course, when the competition will be, he'll be all mad because people didn't get results. At that age, I could tell that something needed to be different. So let's say that even though it was a not necessarily positive experience, to me, it was a positive in a way that it inspired me to not be like that, essentially. It's like, okay, I want to be in a sport. I can see how I would love to be part of that environment and support people, especially those who have the passion and the talent to excel, to get a really good result. So back then I was like, okay, I want to be a coach. So when the time came, which was 5 years later, to decide what to study, the pathway to become a coach was pretty much becoming a phys ed teacher. And I was like, I don't know if I like that. I feel like it's not, doesn't feel exciting to me. And then I don't know how I ended up seeing this dietetics degree. And especially at the university where I did it, it was essentially a bachelor in nutrition and wellness. And the wellness component had a whole section in sports nutrition, physical activity, exercise and health. I was like, oh, so you're telling me that I can do this and actually still be involved in the sport through nutrition. So I just love that idea. I was like, this sounds amazing. I definitely would love to do that. So pretty much from day one, I was aware that I was going to become a sports nutritionist. That the whole time had been my goal. Maybe go to clinical, or I want to see what's around. But in my case, the whole time I was convinced that was exactly where I was going to end up.
So what did you do when you graduated?
So because you finished with the dietetics degree, but not necessarily the specialization, and of course, at least in my case, you never feel like you are ready. So essentially, I enlisted into a graduate diploma with the International Olympic Committee. So it was 2 years in sports nutrition. It's online. It was quite intense 2 years of understanding sports nutrition specifically. And around the same time, I started to work in the State Institute of Sport in Monterrey. It was amazing because I was, of course, getting my sports nutrition degree, and I was at the same time having a group of athletes I could work with in terms of sure that they were feeling right and everything. So it was definitely a great experience. Back then, I was responsible for the nutrition of the kayaking, rowing, and sailing state teams. And yeah, that was incredible. Definitely a totally different atmosphere because it's very hard, very competitive. They have a lot of them, they live in the specific accommodation for them, and they have all their meals for them. And yeah, it was really cool to be part of that as well.
Wow. That's got to be an amazing opportunity. When you're talking about the kayaking and sailing, it reminds me of a documentary. I think it was Netflix, and it followed one of the Tour de France teams, and it was all at the POV, the point of view of the nutritionist who also was the chef.
Yes, Hannah, I think is her name.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was amazing that she would go out and find a farmer's market and find like a place for her to get meat that was GMO free, and it was free range and the whole bit. But the amount of calories that these guys put out, which they had to, and I understand, but it was like following them through each phase and the difference of the meals and everything else. And these guys just praised her, just like, my God, but the idea that all of it was super fresh. She wasn't feeding them anything from a box or from a bag or nothing. I mean, it literally was, everything was completely fresh. So when you were working with the kayakers and the sailors, I imagine you had some of the same experience. Maybe you weren't cooking it, but you were somehow, how did that work? What exactly were you doing for them?
Yes. So when it was essentially not outside of the competition, it was pretty much making sure that they were feeling right, that they were essentially, especially those who were having issues with managing their performance, let's say. So it was like, okay, let's see if nutrition can do something about it. In the case, for example, of sailing and rowing to a certain degree, there was a weight management component as well, because for some of them, they actually have to make weight. So that, of course, was there. And it was, yeah, like pretty much in general, making sure that they were healthy, that they were eating well, doing regular, and I hope they are no longer doing routine skin folds, but that was part of the job as well.
Really?
Yes. Unfortunately, it was still very, especially then, very prevalent in terms of the nutrition intervention, also having a component of changing body composition. And then whenever it was a competition, it was traveling with them. Yes, I was not in charge of cooking, and I'm sure they're grateful for that because I'm a terrible cook. But I was definitely in charge of making sure that whatever they were provided was adequate for them. So if they needed, for example, if it was a dining area, that was probably easier to control because usually the race organizer would make sure that this is adequate for people who are going to be competing. But sometimes it needed to be more purchased. So I will be in charge of making sure that the selection was adequate while keeping it fun. It was pretty much only teenagers. So it was making sure that it was something that it was interesting for them to consume, giving them the energy without risking any problems as well.
Nice.
And also on the competition day, being there for those who had different races on the same day, so making sure they were recovering adequately and those things as well.
Nice. I wish I had somebody like that when I was training all the time. So how long did you do that for?
So I was there for 2 years and a half, and essentially I stopped because I moved here.
So that's when you took the plunge and decided to move to Australia.
Yes, because when I finished my dietetics degree, I remember feeling a lot of anxiety because I was like, okay, I need to do something else. And I knew I wanted to do a master's degree. And when looking at the options, nothing in Mexico looked suitable for what I wanted to achieve, let's say. So the option was going overseas. I was very anxious. I didn't feel ready for it. The whole process in applying and everything felt so overwhelming. Finding the diploma from the IOC was amazing because it's like, oh, perfect. This is giving me everything I need and I don't have to move yet. But the itch to go somewhere and study was still there. So a few years later, I have a cousin who had a scholarship to go study in Spain. And he was the one who said, like, you should try this. It's amazing. And like, I can help you with the process. It's not that hard. So essentially, I ended up applying for the scholarship and got it. So that's how I ended up moving to Australia to complete the master's degree.
Oh my God, that had to be a complete culture shock for you.
Absolutely. I think one of the most, because everybody asks, well, not everybody, but when someone asked me, like, what was the biggest cultural shock for you? I would say two. One, and they actually happened on the same day. So the first one, I remember I landed on a Saturday night or something like that. So I went to the supermarket to get some grocery shopping the next day. And the first shock was that everything looked so different. Now I look at the supermarket and when I go and visit my family, I was like, it wasn't that different. But because I was in that mindset of being so obsessed with food and things like that, I went into the supermarket and I couldn't find the things that I like. I couldn't see anything that would like work the same way I like it. So I remember I came back home, well, to where I was staying and just crying. But I feel like it was just a shock of reality. It's like, hang on, now you are so far away from home. And that's when it hit me actually. And the second shock is that a lot of people love going around barefoot. So at the supermarket, I saw several people without shoes and just walking around. And to me, that was just like, what is going on here? Like, why are people not wearing shoes?
That's different, especially out here in America, no shirt, no shoes, no service. I've lived on that my whole life. There used to be actually little signs in the windows. It'd be like, no shirt, no shoes, no service. And the minute if you walked in there without a shirt or shoes, they were like, nope, turn around. We're not serving you. And here they're just walking around just barefoot.
Yes. I mean, not everybody. I would say probably 5% of the people I've seen around have gone around barefoot, but it still feels like a lot of people anyway. Only happens at shopping malls, supermarkets, of those in the street. I haven't actually paid attention if there's in a restaurant there barefoot. I'm assuming maybe. I'm not sure. I haven't checked. But yes, that was one of the shocks.
Don't walk around looking at people's feet? I don't understand that. No, I'm kidding. And actually, you know what the funny thing is that's like a new trend now. They call it grounding.
Of course.
Right? Now it's a new trend. Now they're telling you, get outside, take off your shoes and socks, ground yourself to the earth, extract your energy from the earth. And you can't do that with shoes. So yeah, that's like the new thing now. It's the new woo-woo, right? It's the new meditation. It's the new yoga. It's the new Pilates. Go outside and walk around barefoot. Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. So how long did it take you to get your master's?
2 years. I finished it at end of 2017.
Nice. And then what did you do when you got done with your master's?
So in the process, I got here in February 2016. And in August 2016, I met who is now my husband. So even though my plan was to do the master's degree, have my international experience, and then go back to Mexico, of course, plans change when I finished my master's. We both were aware that we wanted to be together for longer, but it still was like, okay, I'm going to stay here a little bit longer to see where this goes. And now the 2 years have turned into 8. It's obviously going very well, but of course it changed my plans drastically.
That's fantastic. So I got to ask, where did you have your wedding?
In Mexico, of course, because there's no weddings like the Mexican weddings.
That's what I was going to say. Did you pull your family to Australia, or did you go home and take your fiance with you? I figured you probably would have gone back to Mexico, because I imagine your parents wanted to see this man. At least that's the stereotypical Mexican family that we hear and read about. Okay, so I'm just going on stereotypes.
No, that is okay. We of course they met him way earlier, so I think it was 2017 that he came with me to Mexico, and we spent Christmas over there. And even his parents came as well. So yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh man, that sounds like a great story. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I want to. Now that I'm getting to know you a little bit, now I'm like, the first thing that's popping up, I want to see pictures. So maybe offline, somewhere down the line, you and I can share some pictures of our family. Because I'm totally interested and intrigued about what that wedding looked like. So it's just interesting to me. I really love connections with people and people's stories and stuff like that. So that's kind of a little thing on the back burner. But anyway, all right. So during this time that you were during the masters, were you continuing to race?
Yeah, so pretty much before registering into the university, I was registered in the triathlon club. So yeah, no, I definitely continued to race. And I think that's one of the things that I love the most about being here, because that's what makes it very difficult. If we move to Mexico, well, then I think about how wonderful it is to have a nice lifestyle. And that includes, I can seriously cycle for hours without having to cross a single street, because there's a designated bike lane on the freeway, and then you can easily just do your whole training session without any issues and lots of safety. So that's amazing. And then we where I live, there is a massive river, and of course there's the ocean. So you can we call it river loop, and you get to see the ocean and get to see the river. So it's beautiful to cycle and just have such amazing views while you're doing that. Also running, I can literally just step out the door and start running without feeling concerned, knowing that I'm going to hit the path very quickly anyway. So it makes it really, really easy. And of course, it would have been silly not to do it while being here. Right. And of course, that was, a very good experience. I must actually, even though by the time I moved here, I had been doing triathlon for quite some time, I was very intimidated by the longer distance. So to me, my longest triathlon was, I think it was either Alcatraz or another one in Mexico that it was like similar distance, that is a little bit longer than a standard triathlon. And that was already like a big challenge. And when I moved here, most of the triathlon club people were training for a half Ironman. So I didn't do it straight away, but being involved in that environment where that was the norm, it's like, okay, I'm going to give this thing a go. And of course, as like it happened, all the distances I've done, I again fell in love. I love the distance. It feels amazing. It's a really good challenge. So from there, I decided, I started to do half Ironmans a little bit more regularly.
That's my favorite distance. The half Ironman is my favorite distance. The full, I'm going to do my 6th one in September, and I'm done. I've got friends that do one every year. I got friends that do 2 every year. And I'm like, not for me. No, I love the 70.3. That's like, matter of fact, I tell people, I'm like, you tell me I'm going to go do a sprint. I would rather do a half than a sprint any day of the week and twice on Sundays. Because those sprints, when you're doing them the right way, the way you're supposed to do them, they're hard.
Yes. No, they 100% are.
It's red line from the minute your toe touches the freaking water to the time you cross the finish line. You are red lined out. And I'm like, you know what? No. Keep me aerobic the whole time. Keep me aerobic. I feel great. I'll do a little push, at the transitions and at the finish line. Other than that, I'm good to go.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
so, but I don't mind an Olympic or what they call
Mm.
international distance, which is what half mile swim, half mile swim, 25-mile bike, and a 10K. Those aren't
Mm.
bad.
Yeah, no, they're really good. I like them. Yeah, definitely. It's just that,
But,
I mean, for example, I've never done an Ironman. And the main reason for that is that because I work with Ironman athletes, it's just crazy to see how much training is required. And I don't think right now I have the space and the availability to commit to that. And I'm someone who is, if I'm going to do it, I need to do it right. And I even see it disrespectful if I just like, oh, I'm just going to wing it. And of course, first, I'm going to be miserable if I do that. And the other one is like knowing how hard my clients train and how much they are dedicating to this, coming and being like, oh, I still can do it, even I'm training half of it. It's just, to me, it feels very disrespectful to them.
right. So basically, what you're saying is that you want to maintain the service level to your clients, and you feel like if you're training for Ironman yourself, maybe you're not going to give that service level.
No, I mean that if I see how hard they work, if
Uh,
I were to do it without committing properly,
oh,
it
I
feels
see what
like
you're
I'm
saying.
not
Okay.
being respectful to what they are doing. Like, oh, look at me doing half of that and I still can do it. Like, that's what it feels like. If I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. And that's why maybe one day I love the half so much that I don't know. It may not happen. Who knows?
I get it. I get it. And the funny thing is that it really is the difference between half and a full is the gap in fitness is 10%, maybe 15%. The rest of it, it's all up here. It really is.
Mm.
And it's an amazing. And I've had more than one person tell me that. Like the difference in training between the 70.3 and the Ironman is obviously you're going to do more biking, you'll do a little bit more running. The swimming will take care of itself as long as you're hitting those distances. But the swimming will take care of itself, but it's the more time in the saddle and more time getting your mileage up. But the long, what we call long slow distance, right? LSD,
Mm.
is you've got those. So those go a little bit longer. But your tempo, your speed workouts and your recovery workouts, all those are the same. So
Right.
that's basically what it is. But when you're at 80 miles on the bike and your rear end is telling you that you just want everything possible to get off this bike, but yet you got 32 miles left, you're like, what the heck? Basically that's what everybody tells me, and I believe it. Is Ironman actually doesn't start till mile 80 on the bike, because that's when usually the wheels start to like fall up, and you're like,
Yeah.
all I want to do is get off this bike, and then you get off the bike, and 13 miles in, all you want to do is finish the run, and you know that you still got 2 hours left, or you got an hour and a half left, or whatever you can do your a half in. And he's like, it's torture at that point. So yeah, Chris McCormick, an Australian triathlete, he's always like, embrace the suck. So you finish up your masters, and the masters was actually in, it wasn't in dietitian. It was something specific.
Yes. Yeah, it's a master's in health science, specializing in exercise and health. And because to me, that was the part that I needed more. So I already had the sports nutrition part, but I wanted more about the health science. And I love that this one was health and exercise, because at the end, that was pretty much my area of expertise. Is more about that supportive component, which is that nutrition and health and everything else, not about prescribing training or anything like that. That was a master's. And something that was really good about it that I was not expecting, even though the curriculum it has a really heavy component on public health as well. So yeah, and that was very good at helping me understand, especially from a nutrition perspective, that sometimes you come to someone and say, oh, you should be eating this way, or you should be eating healthier. And you forget to understand that that person is part of a family, that is part of an environment, that is part of a community, and often that decision of like, this is what you should be doing is not as easy to just go and implement it, because there are so many factors that can influence that, starting from, can they afford it? Or do they have access to it? Like, what if they have to travel super far to get to whatever you're suggesting? Or especially, for example, in nutrition, and there's a running joke about how every dietitian will tell you to eat 7 and buns and all these things, that is like, hang on, you are prescribing these things that are actually quite expensive. not everybody can just change their diet and start eating like that. So it was really helpful in making it click and seeing how we can easily, well, I say we, like, or sometimes we can easily say or assume things about someone just by the way they are doing things, when in reality there's a whole spectrum of conditions that are influencing that behavior that we just don't see or understand.
Yeah, no. I get it. And especially since now it's so much more expensive to eat healthy. Why? And it's, you know what I mean? It's like, it's so cheap for people to manufacture in boxes and bags and the whole bit. It's so much cheaper. But our joke here was, when you go shopping at the grocery store, you just stay on the outside. You never go onto the inside of the inner points of the grocery store, because obviously for us, it's always the same thing. As you go to the right, that's usually, I'm just saying usually, the right or to the far left is fruit, right?
Mm.
And then the bakery where they're baking bread, not bread that's manufactured or put into, you know what I mean? And then it's the fish case, and then the meat case, and then the dairy case, right? And that's where, and then you get to fresh juices and stuff on the outside. That's usually what it is. So all the whole foods are on the outside of the grocery stores here in America, and then all the processed stuff is in the middle. So that was a running joke for you. You say it's always eat salmon and almonds. For us, it's always, if you're going to shop on the outside of the grocery store. And that's just not, and you, like, again, it's also the most expensive part.
Yeah, and the one that is going to go off quicker as well. Like, for example,
Right.
you are telling someone that they need to eat the fresh vegetables when actually tin vegetables there's nothing wrong with them, or even frozen vegetables, there's nothing wrong with them. And now they're like, on top of being more expensive, it's a waste, because if you don't get to finish them in 3 days, they're off. So there are so many, I guess, foods that have some stigma around them, when in reality there's nothing wrong with them.
So let's just bounce ahead, because obviously you've gotten to the point where you've gotten this expertise in health science and in exercise science and public health and in nutrition. How did you come up with the intense eat fit, right? Intense eat fit, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. I always joke about how, first, I love the business brand, I love the name, but so whenever I'm on the phone with someone and they're like, so what's your email address? I was like, oh, I always feel like, I feel like I wish I could say at gmail.com, because it's way easier than saying at intensity. Yeah, then you have to spell it. Anyway,
Right.
so how that happened, actually, well, like, essentially, I finished my degree, my master's, and I applied to a graduate program in the Department of Health. So absolutely nothing to do with nutrition or sports nutrition. But it was a really good opportunity. Hundreds of people apply and they only choose 9. And I ended up being selected for it. So ended up working at the Department of Health for, I think, 2.5 years as well. And of course, as it happened for many people, the next thing in terms of like the COVID-19 hit. And for many of us, it was a sort of a wake-up call, I guess, or something that like makes things shake. So in my situation, it was my physio who was, because I continued to do triathlon, and my physio was specialized in triathletes and endurance. And she suggested, why don't you try doing sports nutrition consults for my clients? I think I see a need on this. Why don't you try it? There was absolutely nothing wrong with my job. I love it. It was so chill, well paid. Everything was great. Like, I didn't have that urge to leave it, except for my heart that was still in sports nutrition. Like, I love what I do. I love working with people. I love being so close to the action, let's say. And every single day, you're sitting behind a computer and so far away from the ultimate outcome, because by the time you develop a policy that actually gets approved, that actually gets implemented, I was at a presentation and I remember they were so happy with this policy that was implemented. It took 10 years from let's do this to actually here it is. So I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can wait this long for this. So anyway, from there is, okay, let's try this. And I have a client, I have a friend who does marketing, and I mentioned it to her that I was going to start doing my nutrition thing. It's like, oh, I can help with that, because I'm actually starting to work on branding and things like that. So we ended up back then the name of it was Intensity Advanced Sports Nutrition. So essentially, Intensity Advanced Sports Nutrition rebranded to Intensity Fit, with the concept of marrying everything that is in an essence what I do, which is that, yes, intense component, but the food component, but also the health component. So that's how we came up with this branding. So essentially in 2020, that's when all these started. And by 2021, that's when I officially resigned from my job at the Department of Health and decided to go fully into this.
That's awesome. What would you say that the demographics of your average client?
Sorry, what would you say?
The demographics. So
Yeah.
gender, age, activity level, and basically that's what I'm looking for. What is your average demographic?
Yes. So mostly males. Now, this is not because I don't work with female athletes, but it sort of has been like that. Of course, I love working with female athletes, by the way, but at this stage, probably I have 70% male clients and 30% female clients. They are, regardless of their gender, very intense into their physical activity and their training. All of them are endurance athletes, especially leaning towards the ultra endurance. So triathletes, normally Ironman and beyond. So also Ultraman, for example. And in terms of runners, is actually pretty much 95% of them ultra runners, with a small component of marathon runners. So that is the main. In terms of age, between 30 to 60 usually. So anyway, anyone listening, doesn't mean that I don't work with you if you're outside any of these things, but that's usually how naturally things have shifted. And yeah, essentially, when I started here in Australia in 2020, because I'm a triathlete and because my physio works with endurance athletes, the answer in that endurance space, but it has continued to evolve to the point that it's like every year I seem to get people who are crazier and crazier, let's say, doing longer and longer things. So yeah, I love it. It's definitely, especially nutritionally, it's a quite really big challenge in terms of how we are doing these things. So it's really good. There are so many elements to it that makes it quite exciting to work in for whatever new crazy adventure that I decide to do.
Oh man, that's fantastic. In the show notes, you're going to get her website. It's Intent, INTENS, EAT Fit, intenseatfit.com. I'll put that in the show notes. The site is beautiful and has a world of information. So you need to jump on that and take a look at Gaby's website at intenseatfit.com. Those links will be in the show notes. Are you active on any of the socials?
Yes, definitely. So Instagram is where I'm the most active, let's say. Try to post consistently there every week. So that one is also my business name, which is at Intense Eat Fit. And Facebook also posting regularly there. So it's Intense Eat Fit by Gaby Villa as well.
Excellent. So, and again, that will be those will be in the show notes too. So if you want to get a hold of her, you can go to the website or drop into her DMs, and hopefully, and you're pretty open to that, to grabbing people and answering questions and stuff, right, Gaby?
Oh, definitely. I love it. So I think at the end, it's everything about also being able to help people in terms of offering a different perspective into nutrition, especially when in my journey, the message was pushing me towards a direction that was not helpful. So if I can steer at least one person in a different, more enjoyable perspective, my day is done for sure.
Excellent. Yes. And that's what we say about this website, about this podcast, is that if you take away one little nugget, if you just get one little nugget of information that will help steer you to your next big step, we call it just the next step in your journey, whatever that might be, we've done our job. With that being said, I got a couple questions for you. One would be, what do you find is the most prevalent issue um, with the fueling for triathletes that are just kind of maybe, because you don't work with a lot of beginners, right? You work with people that have kind of been in the sport for a while. What do you find is the most prevalent issue with fueling?
I think there's still a very strong mindset in terms of the fuel sort of not being required or being a problem if you are using it too much, let's say. So, for example, I see this a lot of not cyclists in general, but usually, for example, for bike rides. It's almost like a joke if you show up to the bike ride and you have energy gels and a bar or something extra. It's like, oh, like we're only cycling 4 hours. It's like we're cycling 4 hours. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like so I feel like there is a lot of fear to fuel because there is this idea that by doing so, you are almost going to ruin the quality of your training. When in reality, it's totally the opposite. You need that fuel for that training to be of really good quality. I think part of that has been because I see things changing. I definitely see how there's a better, and like now there's a clearer perspective into understanding that food is fuel and that you need it. But there's still that idea, especially with the racing weight concept, that you need to be at certain weight for race day, and that's how you prepare to be at your optimal, and that's how nutrition is meant to be used to get to that race weight. So it is helping people understand that actually now that's obsolete because there is nothing showing that you dropping weight in order to get to a race is actually going to translate into improved performance. What very likely will translate to as part of like trying to lose the weight is underfueling, risking injury, and pretty much sabotaging your whole preparation. So by fueling adequately, the whole experience is drastically changed. So I see how that perspective is starting to change, and that's great. But I feel like there's still a lot of work that we need to do in allowing people to have the confidence to eat, because there's still like that idea that it's like, oh, it's too much sugar and the carbohydrates. Like, actually, well, that's what your body's using, especially if you want to push at higher intensity and you want to sustain that energy for as long as possible.
I 100% agree. I've been doing some experimentation. I would have Tailwind that, 120 calories or so in my bottle. And then, with like 20, maybe 25 grams of carbohydrates. And then I'd have a 20-gram gel, right? And I do one of those an hour as I've stepped up my training. And I'm on the bike about 10 hours a week. I've gone to the point now where I have 80 grams of carbohydrates, almost 90 grams of carbohydrates in my bottle. And I still have another gel just in case.
Mm-hmm.
But I got 90 grams in and I'm telling you, it changed everything when I doubled my carbohydrates. It changed absolutely everything. And then people were, and I was always big on it. I was like, let's fuel more. But I was doing okay at 44 grams per hour, but it was never the greatest. And towards the ending hours, I would feel like it would get tired, more and more tired. On the run, I use a Precision 90, and it's a one gel, and the gel's got 90 grams of carbohydrates. And I take that sucker every hour. Like I know exactly what mile it's going to be. And I'm like, I take it right before I need it. I'm still coming off on the other one, and I take the other one. So by the time I digest, it's already gotten through. And let me tell you something, my last one, I was able to keep a steady pace the whole time. I was actually able to negative split the last 3 miles. And it was all because I kept these 90-gram freaking gels. Plus, I still had Gatorade and a couple of small cups of Coke on the course. But it was a game changer to double my carbohydrates.
Oh, definitely. And something I want to point out there is that you also use it for training, which makes a big difference. For a lot of people, they see that, like essentially they say, yes, I need the carbohydrate for race day. But if during training, they go with the 40 grams per hour or sometimes even nothing, and they are all puzzled on race days. Like, oh, I just don't understand why I had all these issues and I couldn't stomach the energy gels. Well, even because, and the thing is that, and I did try them, and the try them is, let's say that 90-gram gel, they use it for a 2-hour thing, and then they want to use it for a single, and of course they are going to stomach it in 2 hours because that's 45 grams per hour, versus now you want to use double that, and you never train your stomach to do so. Right. So that is something that is another benefit of actually incorporating your nutrition properly for training.
Right. Well, and then I want to dictate this, and this is what I feel about it versus, and if you have a different view on it, that's great. But I always had a differential with my clients is there's a difference between fuel and nutrition. Fuel does for your workout. It's for pre, during, post. Nutrition is your everyday meals. Not that it doesn't play a part, but nutrition for me is like, you want to be as clean, you want to be whole foods, the whole bit. And the reason why I made those distinctions was so that, hey, if you're doing, like we said, right, you're doing whole foods around the grocery store, the whole bit, you do that while you are doing breakfast, lunch, dinner, your normal daily eating to keep yourself just healthy. The fuel, when I said fuel, that gave them permission to use the gels and stuff, which are manufactured. So it gave them the permission to, or gave themselves the permission to, okay, I can take something out of a bottle. I can take something out of a packet. You know what I mean? And whether what's in the packet might actually be whole food, but it just, you know what I mean? Because we've been teaching about this. Hey, if you're going to get rice, you make sure that it's good rice. You make sure that it's quality rice. You're going to go get fruit. It's quality fruit. Even if you're getting frozen vegetables, but you're getting the right frozen vegetables. You're not getting the ones that are loaded with friggin' extra salt and sauce and, and the whole bit, right?
Ah, definitely.
Right. So that's why I was like nutrition and fuel. Fuel, post. So you tell me if you agree with that statement or maybe you don't agree with that statement.
I think it's a good approach in terms of helping people see how it is important to see other training differently. Because I think, and that's the other trend I'm noticing a lot recently, is that there is this concern that because these products are ultra processed and they are just sugar, they are going to be a problem. And the thing is that there are situations that, let's assume that this is someone who is going to go on a bike ride with a friend and they're going to be chatting the whole time and they are stopping and taking photos. I will never advise 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour for someone doing that type of intensity, because it's very low intensity. Your body won't need that amount of carbohydrate. You still will need nutrition and food, because if you are going to go still for 4 hours, I will say, can you please at least take a sandwich or a bar or something, because you are even going to get hungry at some stage. If you are moving at that high intensity, that's what your body needs. And at the end, if you decide to eat the whole food and you are eating a banana or a potato or something like that, what your body is going to do is it's going to break it down, it's going to make it sugar, and then you're going to use it. So why not make the task a little bit easier by actually giving the sugar for that? Now, exactly. And now if you, let's say, but for example, I'm going to be working on my computer, I will never tell someone to please make sure they have their bottle of Tailwind with X amount of carbs to just be like making sure that they stay productive. So of course there are contexts. The thing, and that's why I don't make the distinction as like, what you eat outside of training is a nutrition, as in doesn't have to be processed or whatever, is because it does influence a lot how your body recovers, how your body responds to that training. So allowing people to be more flexible is also helpful, because it depends, at least that's what I see, for example, depending on how intense or how long that training session was. Even if they feel adequately during it, it's likely that how they eat during the rest of the day will impact how their body responds. So let's say they fuel with the 90 grams per hour, and then they get home and they decide to only have, because they ate all this sugar during the training, actually, I'm just going to have lean chicken and salad and not eat anything else. Or actually, now I'm going to start my fasting window because I'm not allowed to eat because now I had all the calories during the background. Things like that. So like I've seen some crazy things that people do in order to like still sit within their macros and calories, when of course when you were exercising for so long, everything goes out the window in terms of trying to fit in that way. But I love that approach. I love that, like, at least helping people see how what you're doing during training is under very different circumstances as how you are doing it outside of training. So that way people see that the things need to be simpler, things need to be easy to carry as well, even from a practical perspective. Even if you want to fuel on real food, 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, it means 3 bananas an hour. So it's like, you just told me that on your run, you can easily just have all your 90 grams in one hand. Imagine running with 6 bananas or your
Right.
2-hour run. That is impossible. And then if you try and you manage to carry them, it's likely that your gut will suffer because it's not as easy to process. Even though bananas are something that is simpler, it still requires breaking them down way more than a simpler syrup, let's say like the energy gel.
Exactly. And even for me, I even temper it. So if my training session is an hour, it's 30. I make sure that if it's intense, it's 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrates because I'm only working out for an hour. And that also depends on, how intense. If it's super intense, I'll take that 30 grams. If it's an easy hour, I might do it fasting. If it's 1 hour or less. To 2 hours, I go to 60 grams. 60 to 70 grams, depending on the intensity of the 2 hours. 3 hours and over, it's 90 grams per hour, no matter what. Duration matters, right? You could be in zone 2, zone 3, between zone 2 and zone 3, and I'm going to use those 90 grams. I don't need to be in zone 4 to use those 90 grams every hour.
Exactly.
Because duration, it's more about...
Yeah, it's very hard to sustain it for that long anyway.
Right.
So, yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's why I think it's important for people to be aware that the whole purpose and structure of the training will influence the nutrition, because it is easy to listen to us and I'm glad you made that distinction. Hang on, if we're going for 1 hour, I'm not going to be eating 90, and I definitely wouldn't advise it, because 1 hour at high intensity, yes, as you said, like 30 grams, maybe, especially if you are actually well fueled, because your body will have that glycogen. So it does depend intensity, the duration. For example, if it's only 1 hour, but in the morning you did a 2-hour bike ride, how you feel for that hour is going to be different, because now you actually did use energy earlier. So there are a lot of things to think of before just going down a path of like, I'm just going to do this one.
That's absolutely. And as I was mentioning to you, nutrition and fuel. And as far as my clients go, it's not that the nutrition part isn't playing a training effect, right? So you're coming off of like, okay, for instance, I burned I think it was 2,350 calories. No, I'm sorry. It was 4,008 calories for my race. And I only put back, 20 times 3 is 90. I only put back like 2,000 of it, during the race, because you're never going to put it all back, right? But when you go out and you then eat, I don't need to have an 8-ounce steak. I can have a 12-ounce steak with that amount of protein. I can have that big giant potato versus a smaller one, and I can have a salad and a vegetable because I've got all those extra calories that I can put in. If you're going to take out 4,000 calories, you might as well have dessert. So, there's a good time for everything out there. What is your favorite type of client that comes to you directly? You know what I mean? If you were to get that perfect client that walks up to you and says, Gabby, I need your help, what's your favorite to work with?
My favorite type of client will be the one who's open to try something different, the one who is willing to surround themselves with he comes again to how capable and available and like financially situation as well, but
right.
that are willing to listen from different experts. So my favorite type of client will be the one who sees and works with me as their nutrition advisor and is willing to work in that dynamic. For most of my clients, it's really important that we do have that two-way communication, because it's not just me like, oh, you are doing this, or like, here you go, I'm just giving them whatever I believe is right. Because at the end, they are the ones who need to go and implement it and come back to me saying how it went. So someone first off who's willing to give that feedback, because of course it will guide the whole intervention. And at the same time, see that as like, okay, so I have the dietitian who is in the nutrition. I am working with the coach who is on the training. I'm working with my psych or mindset coach or anything that we're in that part. So seeing those distinct lanes, let's say, and willing to listen and to incorporate things and of course still bounce ideas if they are, because at the end, what I mentioned to everybody is, yes, I am a nutrition expert, but you are the expert in your body. So doesn't matter what I say, it's going to be the best advice. If for you doesn't work, we need to change it. Because of course, if it doesn't work because that is not your preference of products, that doesn't sit well with you, or you are actually having a different running strategy as well, we need to incorporate the nutrition considering all these elements. So I find those are the type of clients I work with the best. I think all of my clients are like that at the moment. I love that because I don't think I have any difficult client. It's good because it means that we have that good communication and ability to keep updating things and working together to have that ideal plan for them.
So basically someone who is willing to communicate to you and tell you, hey, you gave me this to try. That wasn't really worked that well. Or maybe I tried it and the last time it worked and this time it didn't. And I need to find out why that's going on, what's going on that. And then you can start pulling out
Definitely.
data points. I am the
Yeah.
exact same way. I mean, the more you can tell me about your training, the better. I use a SAS program and I'm like, you got to put notes in there and tell me exactly how you're feeling. What was going on? Did you have stomach issues? Did you feel something in your legs? Did you feel something? I need to know this. But sometimes you're right. It's like pulling teeth.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like it's that willingness to do it. Because, for example, even though, let's say, I say, okay, it would be helpful if you try this because I can see how there's this gap in your feeling. And if we incorporate this, it will make a difference. And them going and doing it and then coming back is like, Gaby, it did work, but I feel like I didn't enjoy that type of food. Can I have something different? It's very different to me. Oh, no, I don't think it will work. No, I don't think I have time for that. I was like, oh, okay. That is very different, right?
Yeah, I know. I'm constantly asking people, hey, listen, you got to go into MyFitnessPal and you got to log your food. It only takes the first 2 weeks. It's not bad. Once you get past those fast 2 weeks, we are creatures of habit. And in MyFitnessPal, all your recent foods are listed right there to the point where you can just go, oh, for breakfast, I had this. For lunch, I had this. For dinner, I had this. While I was fueling, and I always, when I have it separate, when I have it done for them, I always have breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and workout. And workout is what they've put, what they fueled with, basically pre, post, and during, and post workout. And I'm like, so they just list it. But after a couple of weeks, we fuel with the same stuff because we know it works. And most of the time, our breakfasts are one of 3 things. Most of the time, our lunches are one of 3 or 4 things, and our dinners are one of 5 things. So within 2 weeks, all of a sudden, it's just like click, 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 and you're done in 30 seconds. You can be done maximum 2 minutes. But to get them those first 2 weeks sometimes, and I'm just like, come on, do this because we're going to be able to have that data point. When you sit there and you tell me, hey, I did the same exact workout, and for some reason, I bombed it this time. Where last time I did really, really well. Or did I train? Did their training stress go up? Does their load go up? Did it, whatever. And if everything seems to stay the same and all the indicators state that there's no reason why they should have bombed that workout, then I go back and look at then I go look at their nutrition. And Training Peaks works with MyFitnessPal where it doesn't give me what they ate, but it gives me their macros. And I can go, oh, well, the last time you did this, you were at a 50-30-20, and now you're at a 30-20-50. I mean, you're low on carbs. That's why I bombed. And most of the time, that's what happens. But yeah, that's one of my pain points. Do you use something like that for tracking nutrition?
Not necessarily. So, well, because the way I work with my clients, it's also I have a really good understanding of what they are eating anyway. And because there's a concern of like if they start tracking, they start becoming obsessed with their food, which is something I don't necessarily would like them to. I try and actually discourage it sometimes. If they come say like, oh, look, here's all my loads and all the things I've been eating. And it's like, hang on. Because as you said, like, for example, if there's this pattern where very likely they will continue to eat in that similar way. Well, let's look at how you're eating, see where the gaps are, see how we need to improve, and let's go ahead and do that. And having that understanding of, okay, so I need to recover this way. I need to make sure that I'm eating my breakfast with this arrangement. Makes it really easy, even for them to identify whenever something like that happens. It's like, Now I know why my training was this, because I didn't have the right breakfast, or actually my dinner the night before was. I remember one client who essentially was saying like, "Oh my god, my training session was awful. I felt super bad." I was like, "What did you have for dinner?" "Oh, I didn't have time and I made a smoothie." So essentially, they just had like essentially was protein powder, milk, and something like a fruit, and that was a whole dinner. And they couldn't understand why in the morning they were feeling so flat and they didn't have the energy, even though they did eat their toast in the morning or whatever. Well, obviously the reserve, the tank was pretty much empty, or there was not enough there anyway. Yeah.
250 calories ain't going to do it, which is usually what a smoothie is.
Yeah, exactly. So when I work with them, is often helping people see that for themselves as well. So for example, one of the things that we do as part of one of the programs I have, I call it is a personal nutrition audit. So it's pretty much like tracking, but they are not tracking macros or anything like that. They're just listing down their food. They are listing down like at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everything. And they also list their hunger levels before and after. And of course, they list the physical activity that they did. And then I ask them, okay, look at it. And I want you to see, based on the things that we have discussed about how carbohydrates are important, protein is this way. When you look at it, what do you see? It's like, oh, I can see that first, I'm actually every single day eating the same thing. So I need more variety. I can see that my lunch is pretty much protein and vegetables. So I need more my carbohydrates. I can see that before training, I'm not eating anything. So they even can see that. And then, of course, we are working together, nourishing, and still is and allowing you to have that balance throughout the day. I remember, for example, a client who did that, and it was very interesting that during the afternoon, hunger levels were like beyond hungry. Like she was literally starving. And one of the things that we noticed was that the whole morning she was avoiding carbohydrates. She was very strict about what she was eating. And then, of course, in the evening, even though she was starving, and she would have a massive dinner because she was so hungry, she would finish that and then still feel like having more. So once we talk about it and look at it, she is like, oh, okay, I can see where the problem was. Change how she was distributing her intake, and now everything changed because now their balance was there. She was not feeling that craving. She was no longer going for the cookie jar at work or anything like that, because her body was no longer asking for this rapid energy, because everything was already balanced and aligned in a way that would work for her.
That is super interesting. So where MyFitnessPal asks you how much of that did you have, you're more about, okay, what is it? What are you having? It's not about the amount. It's just about, all right, well, what are you eating? And then how do you feel about that? That is super interesting. You just taught me something, Gaby.
Excellent.
Yeah. So let's wrap this up. Listen, everybody, you got to take a look at her website. If you've got any aspirations of, learning to fuel for your sport, you got to take a look at the website, get a hold of Gaby. Gaby, would you work with anybody that's outside of endurance athletes? Do you work with anybody else outside of it, like somebody that just needs to lose weight or?
So not necessarily, and mostly because my services are so specific that sometimes it's an overkill for someone who comes with that, let's say, weight loss or wellness in mind. But of course, like I still would say, like get in touch anyway, and we can talk about it and see what the need is. Especially if you are someone who's very active, there is a heavy component in terms of how you are dealing with your nutrition and that physical activity that is very likely guiding how you are experiencing, how your body is responding to all these influences.
Yeah, and I think most of our demographic here are people that are active. I think a lot of them probably might take a lot of value in chatting with you, or at least looking at some of your resources. And I think that's more of the demographic here. I don't usually have on that side as far as people that just like, oh, I just need to get started. You know what I mean? Which there are plenty of references out there. I help with people just getting started to get moving. And usually they start moving and then they end up an endurance athlete anyway. It just happens to be that path. Again, intenseatfit.com and on Instagram and Facebook. And I am so excited that I've met you, Gaby, because I'm super excited. Obviously, a fellow triathlete, that's part of it, but just your wealth of knowledge and the amount of work that you did to get where you are is so inspiring. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I think this is going to help out a lot of people.
Oh, thank you so much for the invite, Brad. I was such a joy having a chat with you. I always it was a very different conversation to what I normally have, which was very refreshing and welcoming to to
Oh,
talk about things in a different way.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. And with that being said, hey, listen, if you found this episode, if you have found some value in it, go ahead and, review the episode and share it with somebody that you might find might take some value out of this. And now with that being said, we will see you in the next episode.